We'll start the session shortly. I'm just waiting for everyone to manage to get in. Okay. Since this session is going to take most of the time, we'll make a start on all the opening bits and pieces, then we'll pass over to Charlotte. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm Joanne, the SIG convener. I'll start the session off with a karakia. Tūtau mai runa, tūtau mai rau, tūtau mai I roto, tūtau mai I wahu, kia tū ai, te maritu, te mari ora, ki te katoa, homie, huie, taiti. Just quick housekeeping, the session is being recorded and you'll be able to view it on the YouTube channel later as a refresher. And I will now pass this over to Charlotte to take us through the session.
Thank you, Joanne. And just an apology first up. I have a lingering cough, which just will not go away. So my apologies if I do cough, which I'm probably going to do. So let's get started. Welcome to this session on title proper in relation to the official RDA Toolkit and the National Library of New Zealand policy statements. Since you're here at a SIG professional development webinar, there's a good chance you know quite a lot about title proper already. You're likely familiar with the idea of a collected resource needing a name for us to identify it with, and comfortable with how to recognise one when you see it. For the purposes of this session, I'm going to ask you to set that knowledge aside just for a bit. I want you to go back to when you were first learning to catalogue and you needed to rely on your standards, whatever they were, to tell you what to do. We're going to sit in that uncomfortable space for a while, not because I'm going to teach you anything particularly new in terms of the result you see, but because the tool you're using to support those decisions has changed. We're going to start by moving really slowly. The first example I work through will take approximately half the time available because we are going to dwell on every point, and this may still not be slow enough for everyone the first time round, which is okay. You can go back to the recording later for anything that you need to. But what I want to demonstrate is that you only need to take the slow path once, because once you understand what you're looking at, when it gets familiar, you can very quickly pick up pace. For our session, I'm going to use 4 resources as examples, 3 books and a CD. I have the actual items in hand, but there are images of the various covers, title pages, and other relevant data sources in a PDF, which you can download from the LIANZA Connect cataloguing channel, or you can contact the National Library cataloguers by email to be sent the file. We will be using the official RDA Toolkit, and I'm going to assume a base level of understanding of the terminology and concepts, such as the sort of thing that was covered in the ORDAC Finding Your Way with RDA series. In addition to the National Library of New Zealand policy statements, we will also be using the National Library of New Zealand guidance document where it applies. At this stage, on the RDA Toolkit, there is only a placeholder for this document, but I will be using the latest draft for the session today. The full document will be made available as soon as it is finalised, at this stage likely to be early 2024. We won't be making much use of this today, since most of what we need to know is actually covered by the policy statements. A couple of final assumptions. While RDA can be applicable to many different descriptive communities, because I'm focused on the National Library of New Zealand policy statements, I'm effectively locking us into decisions that are relevant to a library catalogue for a national institution encoded in Mark 21. The demonstration will therefore be of most immediate value to libraries who use Mark. It's not that other communities can't watch and get something from this, but the reality is that to talk about choices for any element, you have to choose a community to represent. As a final stop before we start working in the toolkit, I want to make 3 points. Firstly, due to the way the official RDA Toolkit works, we are going to do a lot of moving between pages. This can easily get confusing. But the key is to remember why we're doing it. And once we've got the answer we need, we always go back to where we were. Today, we care about title proper. So if we're not on the title proper page, we'll be getting some information and then going back to where we came from. Secondly, while we might look at sections of other pages, we need to be sure we've considered the whole page of title proper from start to finish. Now, this does not mean tediously pondering things that definitely aren't useful, but instead knowing that we haven't missed anything relevant. This is the element we need a value for, so this is the page we need to be focused on, regardless of wherever else we go. The third and final thing to remember for now is that you should always be sent to the right page. Whether by an application profile or a checklist or some other means, you should begin this process by knowing which element you're trying to find a value for. We assume, for the purpose of this webinar, that we've been tasked with finding a value for title proper for a resource collected by our institution. Not a very difficult scenario to imagine. When it comes time to describe a whole resource, you will need that application profile or checklist or guide to tell you which elements you're focused on, and then you work through each one in turn. And you'll see some of that happen next week in Eb's demonstration. For today, we're going to keep things a bit simpler. So let's begin with example 1, which I have here in hand, Tragedy at Pike River Mine, which is a book. And let's go to the toolkit and bring up the page for the element title proper. I begin at the top reading the definition and understanding what the element is for. A nomen that is a title of manifestation that is selected for preference in a specific application or context. An alternative title is treated as part of a title proper. Right, well, that probably didn't help you. Let's do that first sentence again. A nomen. Well, nomen is an RDA entity, and without going into too much detail, it's to do with naming things. That makes sense. I need a name for my book. A nomen that is a title of manifestation. What's that? Well, title of manifestation is another element, and it's one we're going to explore a bit today, but it's something we don't usually record in library catalogues, not directly at least. For the purpose of this webinar, it might be useful to think of title of manifestation as a list of all the possible titles that a manifestation might be known by. It could be any one of them, so we need to consider all of them. When we choose one to use as the value of title proper, we have a purpose for it, but for the moment, it's just a list. So, one more time. A nomen, that's the name, that is a title of manifestation, so one from the list of all the possible titles for this resource, that is selected for preference in a specific application or context. So we have a title that we want to choose to be the title we're going to use in our catalogue. That's our context. Good, I understand what it means. Moving on. We're not going to spend time on the element reference box today, so we move on to pre-recording. Now, the pre-recording section helps us determine whether we're on the right page. We should be, because I know this is the element I'm here to get a value for. Otherwise, this is going to be rather a strange presentation. But it's important to get into the habit of reading this section for the information that might be relevant to you. For this element, we are told that there are other elements to consider if what we have is other title information, and also that we shouldn't consider a file name or a dataset name as our value for title proper unless it's the only option. Good to know. We move on to recording. As part of the pattern we'll be using, if there's a policy statement, we must read and follow that first before doing whatever RDA tells me. It's a little hard to tell here, but the faint blue line shows me that this is attached to the recording heading. And while we're at it, the dotted blue line underneath shows the end of a policy statement, which can be useful when they're stacked close together. Anyway, before I read on, I need to read the policy statement. This one tells me that my recording method for title proper is unstructured description. There is no other valid method for me if I am following National Library of New Zealand policy statements. The National Library application profile requires me to record this value as an unstructured description. So whatever else I see on this page about other recording methods, I'm only interested in general instructions and those to do with the unstructured description recording method. Noted. Now that first statement. Record this element as a value of nomen, nomen string, or as an instance of a nomen. Now, this is not an option. I am required to do this if I want to record a value of the element title proper. But what does it mean? Now, I'm not going to spend this session talking about nomen or we'll never get anything done, but we'll click on the link to nomen string. And this is the first opportunity to demonstrate the next part of the pattern we're going to follow. When we are sent to another element page to get information, we need to remember that what we want that information for is the element we're working on, title proper. We're not here at nomen string to care about nomen string. We're here to find a value for title proper. So we don't need to read the pre-recording section. That's there to point us to a different element, and we don't want to be at a different element. We were sent here to get a value. So we start at recording. For this element, the only possibility is recording an unstructured description. The other methods are not applicable. There are no options here, just two instructions. Record the string that is the value of an appellation element associated with an entity, and record the string exactly without addition, omission, or amendment. Right, so what that tells me for title proper is I need to copy what I see. That's all I learn here. I'm going to take what I see. Now I go back using the browser's back button, and I'm back to title proper. Now, I could pause here and explore nomen because that's the other option, record as an instance of nomen. But to save time, I'll let you in on the secret that the NLNZ application profile tells me I won't be creating nomen metadata description sets, so I can move on. The next paragraph tells me about title proper in relation to diachronic works. I don't have a diachronic work, so as long as I know what a diachronic work is and whether I have one or not, I can ignore it in this case. And if I didn't know it applied to my resource, I could find out. And now I get to the section for recording an unstructured description. Great news, that's the recording method required of me. So I read on and I find I have an option box. Now, just as above, there's a policy statement here, so I must read and act on that before I do anything about what the option box tells me. The policy statement tells me I will be applying this option, but then goes on to give further direction. To select the preferred value, follow this order of preference. Right, so I click on the first link to see if it applies. And we've gone exactly where we need to be, and we've arrived at an instruction. Use the following options to select the source of information for the value of an element. We know our element, title proper, and now we read the first condition. The source of a metadata work is a manifestation that's being described. That just means the value we're looking for is going to come from the manifestation we're describing. Yes, that makes sense. And a manifestation consists of one or more pages, leaves, sheets, or cards. Well, yes, we have a book. It consists of pages. So the condition fits our circumstance. We read on to the condition option and see the policy statement simply tells us to apply it. And then we get a table of preference for recording sources. If present, we need to prefer the title from the title page. If not, we move on to the cover or jacket, the caption, the masthead, and the colophon. So let's take a closer look at our item. And this is where you could use your PDF if you've got that there. So we have a title on the cover and on the spine. We have a half title page. We have a title page. And the title is even running along the bottom of some pages. But according to the option we just read, we need to use the title page if we have one, and we do. So we go back, again using our browser button, to title proper. We'll just check quickly there was nothing else here to know in the policy statement. No, just that table of preference. Okay, so we're back at the option. We're armed with the information we need from the policy statement. Now we read the option. Record a value of manifestation, title of manifestation. So we click on title of manifestation. Just like with nomen and string, we can scroll straight down to the recording section. We already know we were sent here, so there's no point wondering if we were on the right page. This recording section begins with a now familiar statement about nomen string in an instance of a nomen. We know, because we just learned this, that this tells us we need to take what we see. So we don't need to click on anything here unless we've already forgotten. The second paragraph, again, is about diachronic works, so we can move past that too. Our resource is not diachronic, so it doesn't apply. The first option under recording an unstructured description is one that we apply, and it tells us to use any source of information and to record the form found in the source of information. Now, we've already discovered that the source we should be using for our value is the title page. So we'll go straight there. And here we have the title, Tragedy at Pike River Mine. There is some other title information on this page, but we already know that's not part of our value. Let's continue. The next option has a policy statement that says we apply it, but then goes on further to qualify that. Only when instructed to by NLNZ guidance on when to use basic transcription. Well, we haven't been instructed to apply it, so for now we don't apply it. The next option, which we apply, is about normalized transcription. So we follow the link to the guidelines on normalized transcription. Now, I'm going to do this bit really too quickly just to save time, but the first time you come here, you should read all the options and instructions and make sure you understand them. For our purposes, we have a very simple title with no diacritical marks, no letters or words intended to be read 2 or more times, and so on. The only things of possible interest are capitalization and language and script. And for demonstration, I'll just do capitalization. Feel free to check out language and script after the webinar if you're curious about what's there. Now, the other problem I have is that the National Library policies aren't visible on this page yet. They're due in the next release, which comes out a bit over a week away. So I'm going to use a PDF version just so that we can work through them today. Our first option, which we apply, is to capitalize a word by recording the first letter of the word in uppercase and the remaining letters in lowercase. So if I am capitalizing a word, I understand that to mean I don't capitalize every letter in the word, just the first one. The next option, which we apply, is about commonly known capitalization of words or phrases. Well, the phrase tragedy at Pike River Mine isn't a brand name or common phrase, so I'm not concerned with this one. Even though the policy statement says to apply, it's just not the situation I have. We'll get on to how to capitalize parts within the phrase as we go on. Next, I have an option with a slightly more complex policy statement. I'm going to apply this option so long as my value isn't for other title information of series, or statement of responsibility. That's fine. I have a value of title proper, so I just apply. And here I find I capitalize the first word of an unstructured description. So tragedy will be capitalized. Moving on. I would apply the capitalization of acronyms and initialisms if that were relevant, but it's not. Next, I apply the option to capitalize proper names. Okay, so Pike River Mine gets capitalized too. The final capitalization option is about substantive words in phrases used as names, which would give us the same result. Pike River and mine are all substantive words in this name. Now, I'm going to stop there, but you'd usually work your way down the transcription page to check any other options that are relevant and which your policy statement set tells you to use. Once we're done here, we return to title of manifestation. The next option is applicable only to early printed resources. Good to know it's there, but I haven't got one of those, so I move on. This next statement isn't an instruction. Instead, it's a pointer to the general RDA guidance section on recording an unstructured description. These are the very general instructions on what that means, and we'll go there just briefly so you know what it looks like. It's there to help you if you need more information on unstructured description generally, but it's not specific to our element, and let's just go back. Following that, there's a table of contents for this section of this page. Now, we can save some time here by deciding from this list whether any of this is applicable to our situation. Our title does not contain an error, does not need a bridging, does not have introductory words, and so on. We do need to be a bit careful that we really understand what all of these mean, in particular the sections on units and on aggregates. And on the very first visit to this page, I'd recommend working your way through every option just to see what's there. But let's just click on data provenance for now, just to get us that far down the page and see if there's anything below it. There isn't. That was the end of the recording and unstructured description section. Structured description is not applicable for this element. Identifier is valid, but wouldn't work for what we're doing. We want a value for title proper, which is what we see, and what we see isn't an identifier, it's an unstructured description. So we're done here. We need to go back to title proper. Oops, clicked one too many times. And here we are, back at that very first option on the title proper page. We have been to the relevant part of the RDA guidance to find our preferred source. We have been to title of manifestation and gathered a value, but we're not done yet. We move down the page. The next option is marked do not apply, and so it doesn't matter what it says, we're not interested in it. Then there's that statement about the general RDA guidance for recording an unstructured description. Nice to know it's there again, but I really don't need it. Then a table of contents. This list is similar, but not the same as the one on the title of manifestation page, and we'll look through it. We don't have 2 or more titles. We don't have 2 or more languages or scripts. No introductory words. It's not an aggregate. We don't have a devised title, not an alternative title, no facsimile or reproduction, no music information, and no change. So again, all of these options are really worth investigating to know what's there, particularly if you don't have a background in years of cataloguing. But for now, we'll again go straight to data provenance. Data provenance is about where your value came from, and we do actually care about that for title proper. So let's find out what it says. Here we see only one option and a somewhat lengthy policy statement. It tells us that when the source is the manifestation that's being described, which means you're getting the information from the thing you're describing, you should record the source of information only for resources in this list. Well, we don't have a cartographic resource or an early printed resource, not an integrating, not moving images, text-based monographs. It is a text-based resource, but we do have a title page. And so this doesn't count either. There's further information here about what to do if you got your title from somewhere else because it wasn't on the resource in hand, but that doesn't apply to our situation. And this is the end of the unstructured description section, and we were told at the start that this was our required recording method. So there is nothing else on this page that is relevant to us. So we're done. We don't need data provenance for our particular title. We have our value of title proper, and we can now take that and plug it into our encoding method, which is marked 21. And that's example 1 finished. Now, that took forever, even with me skipping over some bits, but stay with me and we'll start on example 2, The Witching Tide, which is another book. Now, I've borrowed this copy from my local library, and you'll be revisiting it in depth with Eb next week. But for now, we'll note that there is again a cover and spine title, another half title, another title page. This one does not have a running title. And let's go back to the toolkit and get started. As before, we start at the top. We understand the definition. And we've been sent here from our application profile, so we should be in the right place, but we quickly reread the pre-recording section so we're refreshed on what not to include. We're not going to include other title information. We're not going to use a file name or a dataset name in most cases. Right. We know we want an unstructured description and that we're recording a value of Nomen's string, which roughly equates to take what you see, and that's what we want to do. Our resource is not diachronic, so we're straight back to that first option under recording an unstructured description. We read our policy statement and go to find our preferred source, or maybe we actually didn't need to because this is also a book with a title page, but we return armed with the knowledge that the title page is our source, and we go to title of manifestation. Now, again, we know we're on the right page because we were sent here to get information to help us with title proper, so we go straight down to that recording section. We know about Nomen's string. We don't have a diachronic verb. The first option, which we apply, is to use a source of information and record that source, and we have our title page form because that was the source we found. We weren't told to use basic transcription, so we're going to move on to the second transcription option, normalized. We would follow that link and apply the instructions there, which in this case would result in capitalizing the first word and nothing else, and then come back. The third transcription option does not apply because we don't have an early printed resource. We don't need the general guidance on recording an unstructured description. We look through our table of contents in case there's anything interesting here, but actually there isn't for our resource, and so we go back to title proper. Arriving back at our first option, we move down the page. The next one we don't apply, we don't need the general guidance, and we look through our table of contents on the title proper page in case there was something we missed here, but there isn't. The only one of interest is our data provenance. Now I've lost my place. Dear oh dear. So in case we've forgotten, we can scroll through the National Library criteria again, but it's from a title page, so we know we don't need to do anything, and we're done. Now, it's possible some of you are thinking, but hey, what about that initial article? Why haven't we talked about that? Well, while Mark cares whether or not there is an initial article, the actual value of title proper always includes it. Those words are still part of the title proper. And so here we are with our value of title proper, and then the same information encoded in Mark with our second indicator sorting out that initial article for us. Moving on to example 3. This time I've gone for an online resource, a PDF of a report written for the Productivity Commission. To make it easier on screen, I've got a printout of the first few pages, and we can see there's a kind of a cover page with title information on it, but then no title page. It goes straight into the content. Right, back to the toolkit and to the top of the title proper page. And I might just mention I'm reloading the page each time because it makes the back button use easier. Usually you wouldn't keep going over and over the same page like this, so it wouldn't be a problem, but that's why I'm doing it. Right, so we start at the top. We know the definition and scope of our element. There is some other title information here on this resource, but we know we don't need to include that in the value for this element. We probably do have a file name, but we know we won't be using that because we have a title in the resource itself. We know we want an unstructured description. That will be what we see. We still don't have a diachronic work. Sorry, serials catalogers. We'll have to do some other videos for you. We get to the first option under recording an unstructured description, and we go to the data provenance page to see the table of preference for our source of information. It's paged, so if it were like the others, we'd use the title page, only we don't have one, which is okay. We move down the list and we've got a cover title. Fine, good. We know what our source is. We go back to title proper and we click on title of manifestation. Same thing here. We've been here a couple of times now. It's getting to be a bit familiar. We go straight to recording. Sorry if I'm making you feel a bit seasick. We know we're going to take what we see. We know we don't have a diachronic work. We are going to apply the option to use any source of information and record that form. And we are going to use our cover. We have not been instructed to use basic transcription, so we go to normalized, but there's something going on here that makes me pause. Probably a bit hard to see on here, but I have a colon here between the title proper and what I interpret to be other title information. Do I need to record that colon? Let's check, and we'll go back to my handy PDF because the toolkit page won't actually tell us this for another couple of weeks. And there are 3 options under punctuation. We apply the first option, which is to include punctuation used in a manifestation statement. Okay, so at this point, I still have my colon. The second option, which we apply, is to omit, modify, or add punctuation for clarity. Well, it's not really making anything unclear. So even though the policy statement tells me to apply, it doesn't fit my need to make any changes. The last option, though, which we also apply, unless we had an early printed resource, is to do with punctuation used to separate element values. Now, that is my situation. I have a value for title proper and a value for other title information, 2 separate element values. So I apply the option and omit the colon. I don't record it because that's what I'm told to do. And we go back to title of manifestation. We don't have an early printed resource, and we're going to skim through our table of contents, but again, we haven't got anything interesting to say here, so we go back to title proper. We're back at our first option and we scroll down. We don't apply that next option. We look through this table of contents. We're all good. And we go to data provenance. Now, this time we have a text-based monograph without a title page. So do we need to do anything different? Let's read. When the source is the manifestation that's being described, record a source of information only for text-based monographs with no title page and where the title appears in more than one place on the manifestation. So it wasn't just about the presence of a title page. I needed to have more than one source for the title, which actually isn't happening here. So nothing to apply. And so I have my value, recorded here both as a value of the RDA element and encoded in mark. I've ignored the other title information for now, not because I mightn't be interested in it later, but because it isn't part of the element I'm recording, title proper. But you could ask what happened with that colon, because if I'm putting it in mark, I would have a colon between the subfield A and the subfield B. Well, yes, you would, but you would have it because mark wants you to show the presence of the upcoming subfield B, not because it's part of the value for title proper. Imagine if the punctuation had been a hyphen or a curly line or not there at all. It wouldn't have stopped you putting a colon in your mark record before the subfield B because that colon is not part of the value. It's part of your mark encoding. Okay, enough of books. Let's try this with something else, just to prove the pattern still works. Example 4 is a CD called Something New. How will that go? So we go back to our toolkit, back to the top. We know our definition. We know we wouldn't include any other title information. We're not interested in file names or dataset names. We're going to record as an unstructured description, which is what we see. This one isn't diachronic. All of this is so familiar, it's getting positively boring. First option, policy statement. Go find out our source. Now, this time, we need to read further down because we don't have a manifestation consisting of one or more pages, leave sheets, or cards. What's the next option? This one's the same, but an early printed resource. Good to know it's there, but it's not applicable. Reproductions, micro reproductions, moving images, more moving images. What's this one? The source of a metadata work is a manifestation that's being described. Yep. And a manifestation does not consist of one or more pages, leave sheets, or cards. Correct. And a manifestation does not embody moving images. This is it. Check the policy statement and it's okay because it says we apply. So what does the condition option say? Prefer the following recording sources that carry a title in this order: a textual source on the manifestation or a label that is permanently affixed to the manifestation. And that's what we have. Our CD has a label with a title on it. So that's what I'm told I should use. So knowing I'm going to use my disc label, I return to title proper and I follow the link to title of manifestation. I scroll down to recording because I was sent here to do that. I take what I see, it's not diachronic. I'm going to record the form found in my source and I'm going to use my disc label. I wasn't told to use basic transcription, so I'm going to ignore that and move on to normalize. Oh, hang on. Again, don't know how well this is going to show up, but we have quotation marks here around those words. What do I do about those? Back to my handy PDF. And since we did this in the last example, they're getting more familiar already. We apply the first option, which is to include the punctuation used. So at this point, I still have quote marks. The second option, which we apply, is to omit, modify, and add punctuation for clarity. And again, I have the possibility of removing these quotation marks if they're making something unclear, but you know, I don't think they are. I'm not confused by anything, and it might actually be more confusing for the end user if I get rid of them, because then it wouldn't quite match up to what they see. So even though the policy statement tells me to apply, and I could choose to do it, I don't think I'm going to. The last option, which we also apply, is to do with punctuation used to separate element values, but that's not our situation, so I can ignore that. Back we go to title of manifestation. We don't have an early printed resource, and we see our table of contents. Is there anything interesting here? Now, we might take a look at titles of manifestation that include music information, just to check what's there in case it's relevant, since we are dealing with music. There's a condition that we have a musical work, yes, and the title consists of a type of composition and music information about any of medium of performance, key, date of composition, or number. Well, no. Our title is something new. It doesn't do any of this. If you're still not sure, you can have a look at the examples under each of the condition options, but it's just not what we have. And there aren't any other conditions or options in this section. So let's go back to the table of contents. What else here might be relevant? What about titles of aggregates? Well, as it happens, this particular CD is a single. There's only one track on it, so it's not an aggregate. Yes, I know that's cheating somewhat, since most CDs are aggregates, compiling a number of tracks together, but we are seriously in danger of running out of time today, so I'll leave you to explore the aggregate section some other time and carry on, because there are still some interesting things to do with this here. So there's nothing else on this list we need to look at. We're going to go back to title proper. And we're back at that first option. We scroll down. We don't apply that next option. We get to our table of contents. We know we haven't got an aggregate and that our title doesn't include music information, because it would have had to meet the condition back at title of manifestation. So we keep looking and there's nothing else here, so we go to data provenance. Now, this time we don't have a text-based resource. We need to reread that policy statement. Record the source of information only for sound recordings. No qualifications here, just simply telling us to do it. But do what? Oh yes, it says, record by applying guidance, data provenance, recording a source of metadata that is a manifestation that's being described, option. You may notice that this is an extension of the option wording, which gave us a link to the whole section in the toolkit, but the National Library is pointing us to a specific option, so we follow that link. Now, we're taken directly to the option that the National Library of New Zealand want us to apply. We do not need to scroll up and down to get context because we've been sent straight here. The policy statement says to apply, so we follow the option to record the source of information as a work recording source. Now, just before we click on that link, I want you to see that what we're doing here is different to when we went to nomen string or title of manifestation. In those situations, we were just looking for values to produce a value of the element title proper. What we're doing now is the same process for a different element. We're seeking the answer to the question, what is the value of the element recording source? So when we go to that page, we start at the top with the definition and scope. A source of information for a metadata work that is an unstructured description transcribed from a manifestation that is being described. Oh dear, let's start that again. A source of information. Right, well, that's why we came here. We want to record somewhere that our title came from the disc label. A source of information for a metadata work. Hang on, what metadata work? Well, any statement of an element and its value is in itself a metadata work. Saying where your title came from isn't part of the title, it's about the title, or rather about the value you recorded as the title. So the metadata work is the bit of your description that gives the value for title proper. You've already got that bit of information. Now you want to say something about it, and this element lets you do that. So, a source of information for a metadata work, but not just any metadata work. It's the one that is an unstructured description. Well, yeah, that's what we have. Our title proper is recorded as an unstructured description. Go on. An unstructured description transcribed from a manifestation that's being described. To paraphrase, this element is used to record the source of what we copied from the manifestation we were describing. That makes sense. So we go on. There is no information in the pre-recording section. Our recording heading does have a policy statement, but we can't see it because there's another policy statement too close. That's okay, we just hit send back on the one on top. So in order to follow the National Library of New Zealand application profile, we need to record this as an unstructured description. It does not matter that there are other possible recording methods for this element. If we're following NLNZ, we are using an unstructured description. Moving down to the recording an unstructured description section, and the first option, and we have a policy statement that says apply NLNZ guidance. Now, in a few months' time, when you click on this link, you'll get to the proper guidance. For now, there's a holding page. Fortunately for you all today, I have access to the draft document. And so here is the section on recording source. It tells us that we might need to add extra contextual wording for clarity while we're working in a MARC environment. It also tells us that the examples to follow will show actual values of the element recording source in bold. We're advised to also consider the elements note on metadata work and source consulted. And then this part of the guidance is divided into sections. Both the general examples and the section specifically on title proper may be of interest, so let's move down. The general examples are precisely that. MARC displays of where a value of recording source can often be found. We're given enough context that we could find the whole example if we needed it, but the important part is in the bolded text. Let's move on to the section on title proper, and now we see it's divided into types of resources. We don't have an integrating resource, nor a moving image, nor a serial. Did you notice this list's alphabetized? Okay, sound recordings. We have a statement. Record the source of title proper for all sound recordings. Well, that matches the policy statement back on the title proper page. Then we have a single, simple mark example. The bolded part is disc label. But as we were warned at the beginning of this section, we may need contextual wording. If we just had the words disc label in that Mark 500 field, it wouldn't be meaningful to anyone. We need to explain that the disc label is the source of the title. So, having absorbed that guidance, we return to our recording source option and read it. Record an uncontrolled term or a term that is transcribed from a source of information. Well, our term disc label didn't get transcribed from anywhere, but it doesn't have to, so that's okay. What about the next option? Also apply in NLNZ guidance, but we just read that guidance, so we don't have to go back there. The option says, record details or other unstructured information. That's the contextual stuff. RDA says we can, NLNZ says we should. And finishing up the unstructured description section is the by now very familiar offer to tell you about recording an unstructured description. Since NLNZ's application profile required us to record an unstructured description for this element, there is nothing else useful to us on this page. And so here we have our value of title proper for the CD, both the RDA value and the mark encoding of that value. And here's our value for recording source. The straight RDA value is disc label. And then when we encode it in mark, we need to add that contextual wording to explain which value it relates to. We are now running out of time, but I'd like to recap a few features of what we've done today before I finish. Firstly, it's going to be slow each time you encounter an element for the first time, but I hope you can now see that it doesn't stay slow. With each time you do it, you become more familiar with when you need to click where and why, and it will stop feeling slow because it will stop being slow. We took nearly half an hour to do that first example. It took us less than 10 minutes to complete the next 3, and one of them wasn't a book. We even had time to find a value for a completely different element, recording source, which required us to start the whole learning process over. But what we'd learned at title proper meant that understanding recording source was definitely faster, and that will be true for new elements you encounter. The second takeaway point is that you must expect to jump around to find the value you want. Sometimes you need to go to another element page, sometimes to an RDA guidance page, sometimes to somewhere else. The most important thing is to remember why you're on each page, particularly with elements. Are you there to record a value for that element, or are you there to find a value for a different element? If you're recording a value for that element, you need to work your way down from the top and don't stop coming back until you've covered everything applicable. If you're finding a value for a different element, start at the recording heading and only work on the section or sections applicable to what you're doing. Then go back, always go back. Now, I'm well aware I made the navigation look smoother and quicker than it will feel the first time you try it on your own. That's because I'm now really familiar with what I'm looking at. You'll get there too. It's just practice. Be kind to yourself and try what I've done here. Don't try to create a whole record first off, but start with one element and repeat it a few times to see how it works. And because the policy statements are already there, this very quickly becomes about honing in on what you need rather than getting lost in the structure or needing to make decisions on the spot. Thirdly, the first time you read something, read it slowly. Think about how I handled the definitions of both title proper and recording source. On first reading it fast, it was blurry and confusing. It was really tempting to say, I think I get it, and rush on, but take the time to make sure. Do you actually know what it's saying? Really? If not, then you need to find out, not just for a definition, but anywhere there's something you don't get on first reading. Sometimes a single statement might make all the difference as to whether you get the result you expect or send you off on a completely different path. It's really easy to get lost if you rush ahead on what you think you know instead of what it actually says. And if that happens, go back to where you were. The browser back button's a great friend. Finally, remember that all I've shown you today isn't really important for these very simple examples, but getting familiar with the official RDA within the RDA toolkit, and with whatever set of policies and application profiles and guidance documentation you're choosing to follow, means you're more prepared to tackle more complicated situations. The more you use the toolkit, the more familiar it becomes, until you no longer remember why it took you so long the first time, and you only have to slow down when you handle something new or unusual. Now, this was a very intensive session, and I realise it might take a while to sink in, so you may want to re-watch and try it out for yourself in your own time. And if some of the terminology or structure wasn't so familiar, remember there's lots of good background content on the RDA Toolkit's YouTube channel. Next week, Eb will pick up my second example, the witching tide, and go on with exploring other elements in a very similar way to how we handle title proper today, so that you can see the process works the same for other elements too. In the meantime, I believe we have a minute or two for any quick questions, but I'd really love to start a conversation on the RDA Oceania list about any thoughts and experiences with the official RDA. So if you think of something afterwards, please consider putting it there. And that is the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was very informative. Made it much clearer. Sort of, I was able to relate it back to AACR2 and the existing toolkit. So that was very useful. So have we got any questions from anyone? Either put them in the chat, or if you can, unmute yourself and ask questions. Either way is fine.
I'm well aware it's a lot of information thrown at you really fast. And I should probably have said the LIANZA Connect cataloging channel would be another place to have an awesome conversation.
Yes, that would be another good place. Yes, it's a bit much more user-friendly than the email list. Oh, looks like we've got one question. The concept of metadata work being a work is very helpful in metadata.
Yes, very meta. It's funny how we haven't really thought of that in the past, of the catalogue record we create being a work in its own right, but it is. I hope I didn't cough too often.
No, you were fine. Doesn't look like we've got any more questions at the moment. Just a lot of people's coming through saying thank you.
Lovely. You're all very welcome. And I hope more than anything that this is starting to answer that question that we keep getting asked about. So what does it mean in the real world?
It did. Well, if we haven't got any more questions, I will do the closing karakia. Okay. Let's see if I can do this. Ka whakare aki te tapu ki runa, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turiki whakataha ai, kia turiki whakataha ai, haumie, huie, taitia.
Okay.